Colonel Danny Terza, who outlined the map for an Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank for Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, has spent the past few months advising Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the possible future borders of a Palestinian state. The talks between Netanyahu and Terza represent the first time that the Prime Minister has dedicated official groundwork to the subject of future borders. According to a senior Israeli official in Jerusalem, Netanyahu even sent Terza to a meeting on the subject with President Shimon Peres several weeks ago. The purpose of the meeting was to brief Peres on Netanyahu's ideas on the issue of the borders of a Palestinian state, as well as the option of preparing a map with the borderline that would represent the Prime Minister's position on the matter. Terza's briefing to Peres was part of the discussion the Prime Minister had with the President over the latter's initiative to resume negotiations with the Palestinians. In recent months, Peres has held at least 4 meetings with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. Some were held in secret at the London home of Jewish businessman Paju Zebeldaletz. The meeting between Peres and Terza took place some 2 weeks before another secret round of talks that the President planned to hold with Abbas in Amman. This round of talks did not materialize following a veto from Netanyahu, who learned that the President intended to present positions that deviated from those he permitted. Nevertheless, the fact that Netanyahu sent Terza to speak to Peres suggests that the Prime Minister was deeply involved in the negotiations and had approved Peres's actions with the Palestinian leader. Come September 20th, it is likely Mr. Peres will represent Israel at the proposed vote for a UN recognition of a Palestinian state, not Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. However, Netanyahu will still make history. It's true that Netanyahu is making history as we speak. On his watch, the UN General Assembly is expected to recognize an independent Palestinian state by a huge majority. The wording of the draft, crafted in recent days by the Fatah leadership, is designed to enable even problematic countries such as Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, and the Czech Republic to climb on board or at least abstain. This version will make it difficult for the United States and the Marshall Islands, and even for Israel, to explain their votes against the proposal. Instead of recognizing Palestine within the 1967 borders, it will state that the permanent borders will be determined in negotiations with Israel based on the borders of June 4, 1967. This approach made it possible to enlist the support of leading moderates in Hamas, who claimed that recognition of the 1967 borders before the signing of a final status deal means waiving the claim to the right of return. The new document presents the Palestinian strategy both before and after the UN vote. Already in the preface, the authors stressed that strategic unity, now greatly enhanced by the reconciliation process, is a key condition for putting together an effective strategy. The document's starting point, given the Israeli government's intransigence, the option of settling the conflict via bilateral negotiations, the path pursued by the Palestinian leadership for 20 years, is no longer available. Most of the document's authors support the option of an independent Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, with Jerusalem as its capital, and a fair arrangement that will fulfill the right of return and the compensation of the Palestinian refugees. The document rejects the possibility of continuing the status quo, maintaining that the endless negotiations provide cover for expanding the settlements and consolidating the occupation. The authors also erase from the agenda the option of a Palestinian state with temporary borders and limited sovereignty under effective Israeli control. If the strategy of a diplomatic struggle for Palestinian independence, including sanctions, turning to the International Criminal Court, and non-violent resistance as in Egypt and Tunisia, does not change the situation, the group recommends switching to what the document calls Plan B, dismantling the Palestinian Authority and restoring responsibility for the West Bank's inhabitants to Israel. The authors are not ignoring the price their public would pay for that, but wonder what honorable option would remain. If it turns out that this option is unattainable, the authors recommend working toward a model of a binational state or democratic state without distinction between Israel and Palestinian citizens. Another possibility is a confederation between Jordan and the Palestinian state. They hope their neighbors will understand that the realistic alternatives to a genuine negotiated settlement will be far worse for Israel's security. Most participants in the workshops rejected an armed struggle against a foreign occupation and especially the use of violence against civilians. But the authors warn that a change in strategy from an attempt to achieve political independence to a conflict like the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa will play into the hands of extremists in the region. Should this happen, not just Israel's legitimacy will be under threat, but its very existence, they conclude. And this will have been brought about by Israel itself. One major point that should be taken from this article is that the days of endless negotiations are over. The next stop in this Middle East saga is either war or peace. We know that a temporary peace is imminent, but will it come first? The participants in the workshop ended by saying they reject an armed struggle against Israel, and especially against civilians, but they were not responsible for the possibility of an anti-Israel uprising by extremists in the region. Their concluding remarks: should this happen, not just Israel's legitimacy will be under threat, but its very existence, they conclude. And this will have been brought about by Israel itself. These closing remarks could very well be prophecy in advance. It's hard to say which direction this future outcome will take, but since Israel's rebirth, their enemies have not fared well in open conflict. I fully expect that trend to continue. This is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.